I want to welcome you gently, as if I'm opening a quiet door and inviting you into a room where the lights are low and the air is still. You might be listening while walking, sitting, or lying down. And wherever you are, I hope your breathing can slow just a little with me. Today, I want to talk about something that arrived not in daylight, not in noise, but in the quiet hour before dawn, a moment when I woke up at 4 a.m. and realized something important. It was one of those mornings when sleep slips away without drama. There was no alarm, no sudden shock, just a soft lifting of the night. My eyes opened to darkness that wasn't heavy, only deep and calm. The room felt familiar, yet slightly strange, as it always does when you wake too early. The window showed a muted blue, not quite black, not yet morning. I lay still for a moment, listening. The house was quiet, the kind of quiet that feels alive, as if everything is holding its breath. I remember the weight of the blanket on my chest, warm and steady. I remember how my thoughts moved slowly, like water finding its path. I did not rush to stand up. I let myself stay there, feeling the silence, noticing my heartbeat. In English, we might say. I was wide awake, but really, I was gently awake, not sharp, not anxious, just present. I turned onto my side and watched the faint outline of the bookshelf against the wall, the shape of a chair, the soft shadow of the curtains. After a few minutes, I slipped out of bed. The floor was cool beneath my feet, and I moved quietly, as if I didn't want to disturb the sleeping house. In the kitchen, the world felt almost sacred. I filled the kettle with water, the sound of it echoing softly in the stillness. As I waited, I leaned against the counter and looked through the window. The street was empty. No cars, no footsteps, no voices, just the silent glow of streetlights and the slow breathing of the city. When the kettle began to hum, I listened carefully. There is something comforting about that sound, a promise that warmth is coming. I made my tea slowly, watching the steam rise and curl into the air. I wrapped my hands around the mug, feeling the heat seep into my skin, and then I stood there, sipping, watching the first hint of light touch the sky. In that quiet moment, a thought came to me, not loud, not dramatic, but clear. I realized how often I move through my days without truly noticing them. I realized how many mornings I wake up and immediately reach for my phone, my plans, my worries. But at 4 a.m., there was nothing to rush toward. There was only being. I sat at the small table by the window, tea warming my body, and I remembered another early morning from years ago. I was on a night train, traveling alone through a dark countryside. The train moved steadily, rocking gently like a lullaby. I couldn't sleep, so I pressed my forehead against the cool glass and watched the world pass in fragments, distant lights, empty fields, the occasional farmhouse glowing in the distance. In that train carriage, everyone else was quiet. A man across from me had his hat pulled low over his eyes. A woman by the aisle held her child close, breathing slowly. I felt both alone and connected, a small human moving through a vast, sleeping world. When the train stopped at a tiny station in the early hours, the platform was nearly empty. A single worker stood beneath a flickering light, waiting, watching, almost invisible. I stepped out for a moment to stretch my legs, and the air was cold and clean. In that stillness, I felt something similar to my 4 a.m., awakening a sense that time can open up when we are quiet enough to notice it. I boarded the train again, sat by the window, and simply watched the darkness thin into gray. Back in my kitchen that morning, I held on to that memory as the sky slowly brightened. I thought about how English, in its simple phrases, can carry these quiet truths. When I say, I woke up early, it sounds ordinary. But when I say, I woke up before the world, there is a different feeling, a different rhythm. Repeat after me. Slowly I woke up before the world. Let the words sit in your mouth. Try saying it again, gently. I woke up before the world. Notice how it feels, not just as language, but as an experience. As I finished my tea, I walked back to the bedroom and stood in the doorway, watching the light grow. I thought about another student of mine, a woman who once told me she hated mornings. She said they made her anxious, rushed, behind before the day even began. One day, I suggested she try waking just 10 minutes earlier, not to work, not to plan, but simply to sit with her thoughts. She came back the next week and told me something that stayed with me. She said, "Those 10 minutes were mine." In English, that sentence is simple, but its meaning is deep. Those 10 minutes were mine. Repeat after me. Those 10 minutes were mine. Say it slowly. Feel the ownership, the calm, the quiet claim over your own time. Standing there at 4 a.m., I understood her more clearly. It wasn't about productivity or meditation or discipline. It was about meeting yourself without noise. The realization that came to me was not a solution to my problems, not a dramatic revelation, but something softer that awareness grows in silence. And that language can be a bridge to that awareness. Sometimes I think we treat English like a tool to rush through, learn faster, speak better, sound smarter. But in moments like that early morning, I feel that English can also be a way to slow down, to name what we feel, to breathe through words. When I say, the room was quiet, I am not just describing sound. I am describing a state of being. Maybe you felt this too, that strange clarity that arrives when the world is still. Maybe you've woken up before dawn, or sat alone in a quiet place, or watched a sunset when no one else was there. In those moments, we are not just existing, we are noticing. As the sky turned pale blue, I went back to my chair and sat down again. I placed my empty mug on the table and rested my hands in my lap. I closed my eyes for a moment and listened to my own breathing. In English, we might say, I was at peace. But peace is not always something loud or dramatic. Sometimes it is simply the absence of hurry. I began to think about how often we rush our words as well. We speak quickly, worried about mistakes, afraid of silence. But silence in language can be powerful. It gives space for meaning to settle. Try saying this slowly with me. I am allowed to be still. Repeat it. I am allowed to be still. Let the words breathe. Later that morning, when the sun finally rose fully, I stepped outside. The air was fresh, almost sparkling. Birds were beginning to sing, and the first cars moved quietly along the street. The world was waking up, and I felt as if I had already lived a small, private morning before the public one began. I walked a short distance, hands in my pockets, feeling the coolness on my face. I thought about how learning English is often like this walk, slow, steady, sometimes quiet, sometimes challenging, but always moving forward. Each word is a step, each sentence a breath. I remembered another scene, years earlier, when I was teaching in a small classroom with the windows open to a gentle breeze. My students sat in a circle. and I asked them to describe a simple moment in their lives. One man spoke about drinking coffee with his mother on Sunday mornings. His voice trembled slightly, not from fear, but from memory. As he spoke, I saw how language carried emotion, how English became not just grammar, but feeling. That is what I felt at 4 a.m. That language and life are deeply connected. When we talk about our day, our morning, our quiet moments, we are not just practicing vocabulary. We are practicing awareness. We are learning to notice ourselves and the world with more care. Try describing your own morning, even if it is just in your mind. You don't have to be perfect. Just begin with something simple. I woke up. Then add a feeling. I woke up quietly. Or I woke up tired. Let the sentence grow naturally. As the day moved on, the memory of that early hour stayed with me like a gentle echo. Meetings, emails, conversations, all of them felt slightly different because I had already touched stillness. I realized that the important thing I learned was not something I could write on a list. It was a reminder to slow down, to listen, to let moments unfold. Sometimes I feel we forget that we are allowed to move at our own pace. We compare ourselves, rush our progress, judge our accents, our mistakes, our speed. But at 4 a.m., none of that mattered. There was only presence. Maybe you've felt the weight of that rush too, the pressure to speak perfectly, to understand instantly, to never pause. But English, like life, can be approached gently. You can take your time. You can breathe between words. You can let meaning settle. Repeat after me once more. Slowly, I can take my time. Say it again. I can take my time. Let that be true, not just in language, but in how you move through your day. As evening came, I found myself thinking back to that quiet kitchen, that cool floor, that soft blue sky. I realized that moments like that are always available to us. If we are willing to slow down enough to meet them, you don't need to wake at 4 a.m. to find them. You only need to listen. When we learn English this way, not as a race, but as a conversation with ourselves and the world, something shifts. You are not just memorizing words. You are learning how to notice, how to feel, how to express your inner life. And so, as you finish listening, I invite you to carry a little of that quiet with you. Let it soften your breath, your thoughts, your speech. Let it remind you that learning, like dawn, arrives slowly and beautifully. And even now, as I speak to you, I can almost feel that early morning stillness returning, as if time folds gently in on itself. It's interesting how certain moments stay with you, not as images, but as sensations, the cool air on your skin, the quiet hum of a kettle, the slow pulse of your own heartbeat in the dark. I've noticed that when I recall that awakening, I don't just remember what I saw. I remember how I moved, how I breathed, how carefully I placed my feet on the floor. Later that same day, I found myself sitting in a cafe near a window, watching people begin their routines. Some walked quickly, eyes on their phones, shoulders slightly tense. Others moved more slowly, carrying their mornings with them like something fragile. I held my cup of coffee and thought about how many inner mornings exist inside one city, thousands of people waking, thinking, worrying, hoping, remembering, all at once. A man sat across from me reading a newspaper, brow slightly furrowed. A young woman tapped her fingers on the table, waiting for a message. Outside, a child tugged gently at their parent's sleeve, asking a question too early for such seriousness. In that moment, I felt that quiet awareness from dawn stretching into the day, reminding me that every person carries their own 4 a.m. inside them, even if they never wake to see it. I began to think about how we talk about time in English. We say, "I didn't have time," or "time flew by," or "I lost track of time." But at 4 a.m., I didn't lose time, I found it. Not more time, just clearer time. Time that felt spacious instead of crowded. Try saying this slowly with me. Almost like a whisper, I found time in the quiet. Let the words rest. Say it again. I found time in the quiet. Notice how that sentence feels different from "I didn't have time." One feels tight, the other feels open. In my lessons, I often see students rushing their sentences, trying to reach the end before they've fully lived the beginning. They speak quickly, afraid of silence, afraid of being judged. But I've learned that fluency is not just speed. It is also calm. It is knowing when to pause, when to let a word breathe, when to trust that meaning will still be there if you slow down. I remember another morning years ago when I stayed up all night working on a project. At 5 a.m., exhausted, I stepped outside to clear my head. The streets were nearly empty, just like that 4 a.m. awakening. But my mind was the opposite, noisy, crowded, restless. I walked for a long time, trying to shake the tension from my shoulders. Eventually, I found myself near a small park where a single gardener was watering plants. The steady rhythm of the hose, the soft splash of water against leaves, slowly pulled me out of my thoughts. I stood there watching, feeling my breathing align with the movement of the water. In that moment, I understood that quiet doesn't always come from silence. Sometimes it comes from rhythm, from something steady and gentle that invites your mind to settle. That memory connected deeply with my early awakening. Both moments reminded me that stillness is not something you force. It is something you allow, and language, in its best form, can carry that same gentleness. When you say, "I am here," in English, it can be more than a statement of location. It can be a declaration of presence. Repeat after me. Slowly, "I am here." Again, "I am here." Feel how those words anchor you. As evening approached on the day I woke at 4 a.m., I noticed something subtle. I spoke more slowly. I listened more carefully. I didn't feel the same urge to fill every silence with words. When a colleague paused before answering a question, I didn't rush them. When a student searched for the right phrase, I waited, patiently, giving them space. Sometimes I think that learning English is not just about adding more words to your mind, but about learning when not to use them. About understanding that silence can be part of communication, that hesitation can be thoughtful rather than weak. Maybe you've experienced this too, that feeling of wanting to speak perfectly, yet sensing that perfection is not the real goal. What matters is honesty, presence, and connection. At 4 a.m., none of my thoughts were polished, but they were real. I often tell my students that English is not just a language they use with others, but a language they can use with themselves. You can describe your feelings, your memories, your quiet moments, even when no one else is listening. You can say, "I felt calm," or "I felt small in a big world," or "I felt connected to everything around me." Try this quietly in your own mind. "This morning, I felt," and finish the sentence honestly. You don't need complicated words. Simple ones carry weight when they are true. As night returned that day, I found myself back in bed, the same room, the same window, the same familiar shapes in the dark. But something was different. I carried that early morning realization with me like a soft light inside my chest. I understood that waking at 4 a.m. was not the point. The point was noticing my breath, my thoughts, the quiet world around me. And I realized that this kind of noticing can shape how we speak, how we learn, how we move through life. Sometimes I feel that the deepest lessons come not from big events, but from small, quiet moments that slip easily past us if we are not paying attention. A cup of tea in the dark, a train gliding through a sleeping countryside, a single gardener watering plants at dawn. These are not dramatic stories, but they are meaningful. Maybe you've had your own version of this, a moment when you suddenly saw something clearly, not with your eyes, but with your heart. Maybe it happened while walking, sitting alone, or even while listening to this now. Those moments are valuable, not because they change everything at once, but because they remind you to slow down. And as you continue learning English, I hope you can carry this same spirit learning not only with your mind, but with your awareness. Let your words be steady, your breath gentle, your attention kind. Repeat one last time with me. Slowly, I am allowed to notice. Say it again. I am allowed to notice. Let that permission stay with you. So when your next morning comes, whether you wake at 4, or 7, or 10, you might take just a moment before the world rushes in. Feel your breath. Look around. Listen. And perhaps, in English or in your own language, quietly say, I am here. Because in that simple sentence lies something important, not just about language, but about being human. And as I sit with that thought, I am here, I notice how it echoes beyond that single morning, how it travels quietly into many other parts of life. It is not a dramatic statement, not a declaration meant to be shouted. It is more like a gentle grounding, a soft hand on your own shoulder, reminding you that you exist, that your presence matters, that your inner world is real, even when the outer world is loud. In the days after that 4 a.m. awakening, I began to see small moments differently. When I walked down the street, I paid attention to the rhythm of my steps instead of only my destination. When I spoke with people, I listened not just for their words, but for their pauses, their hesitations, the emotion beneath what they said. It felt as if that early morning had tuned my senses, like adjusting the focus on a lens so the picture becomes clearer. I remember one afternoon, standing in a long line at a grocery store. Normally, I might have felt impatient, checking my phone, mentally listing all the things I still needed to do. But that day, I simply stood there. I noticed the soft music playing overhead, the quiet beep of the scanner, the murmur of voices around me. The woman in front of me smiled nervously as she searched for her wallet, apologizing softly. I told her, "Take your time." And I meant it, not as a polite phrase, but as a genuine feeling. In English, take your time is something we say often, but how often do we truly feel it? Repeat it slowly with me. Take your time. Say it again. Gently. Take your time. Let those words carry more than convenience. Let them carry kindness. That moment in the store reminded me that awareness is not reserved for special places or spiritual retreats. It can exist in ordinary spaces, in a line, on a bus, at a kitchen table at dawn. It is simply a way of being with whatever is in front of you, without rushing, without judgment. I thought again about my students, about how many of them feel pressure when speaking English. Their shoulders tense, their voices speed up, their minds race ahead of their words. I wished they could feel that same calm, that sense that nothing terrible will happen if they slow down. That silence is not failure. Sometimes, in class, I ask them to close their eyes for just a few seconds before speaking, not to meditate, but to breathe, to center themselves, to remember that they are not performing, they are communicating. In those moments, I see a subtle shift. Their sentences become softer, clearer, more human. Try this with me now, even if you are only listening. Take a slow breath in, then let it out, and quietly, in English or your own language, say, I am allowed to speak slowly. Repeat it, I am allowed to speak slowly. Feel how that changes your posture, your mind, your relationship with words. As weeks passed after that early morning, I noticed how the memory would return at unexpected times. During a busy meeting, when voices overlapped and tension rose, I would remember the stillness of the dark kitchen, the warmth of the tea, the slow brightening of the sky. It didn't make the meeting disappear, but it changed how I moved through it. I spoke more deliberately. I listened more carefully. I reacted less, responded more. I began to understand that the important realization I had at 4 a.m. was not a single lesson, but an ongoing practice, the practice of returning to presence, again and again, through breath, through attention, through language. There is a beautiful phrase in English to come back to yourself. It suggests that we often drift away into worry, distraction, comparison, fear, and that awareness is a gentle return. Repeat after me. Slowly, I can come back to myself. Say it again. I can come back to myself. I also started to think about how this connects to learning English over time. Progress is rarely a straight line. Some days you feel confident, fluent, expressive. Other days, words feel heavy, awkward, out of reach. But like that early morning, learning is not only about moving forward, it is about returning to patience, returning to curiosity, returning to kindness toward yourself. I remember another student who once told me, I feel stupid when I make mistakes. Her voice was quiet, almost ashamed. I asked her to imagine waking up at 4 a.m. when the world is still half asleep. I asked her, would you judge the morning for being imperfect? She smiled softly, understanding what I meant. Mistakes, like dawn, are natural. They are part of the process of becoming clearer. In English, we often say, it's okay. Those two simple words carry so much comfort. Try saying them slowly with me, it's okay. Again, it's okay. Let that be a message to yourself, not just about language, but about being human. As I reflect now, I realize that waking at 4 a.m. did not change my life in a dramatic way. I did not suddenly become a different person, but something subtle shifted a greater appreciation for quiet, for slowness, for the spaces between words and actions. Even at night, when I lie in bed now, I sometimes imagine that faint blue light before dawn, that feeling of being gently awake. It reminds me that clarity does not always come from effort. Sometimes it arrives when we soften, when we listen, when we allow. Maybe, as you continue with your own day or evening, you can carry a small piece of that with you. You don't need to search for a grand realization. Just notice one thing: your breath, the sound around you, the way your body feels in this moment. And if you choose to speak English later, even just in your mind, Let your words move at the same gentle pace. You are not racing anyone. You are not proving anything. You are simply expressing your inner world. Repeat one last time with me, slowly, as if you were speaking into the quiet before dawn. I am here, and that is enough. Say it again. I am here, and that is enough. Let that settle softly inside you. Because in that simple truth lies something deeply important, not only for language, but for life itself. And as those words settle, I am here, and that is enough. I notice how they ripple outward, touching memories, moments, and quiet corners of my life that I don't often visit. It's strange how a single early morning can open so many doors inside you, doors you didn't even know were there. It's not that I suddenly became wiser or calmer in every situation, but that I became more aware of the small spaces between things, between thought and action, between speaking and listening, between waking and living. A few days after that 4 a.m. awakening, I found myself on a crowded bus during rush hour, people pressed close together, bodies leaning slightly with each turn, voices overlapping in a low hum. Normally, I might have felt irritated, trapped, or impatient. But that day, I stood near the window and watched the city move past, like a slow, unfolding story. I noticed the rain beginning to fall, small drops gathering on the glass, sliding down in crooked paths. I watched a woman beside me gently adjust the strap of her bag, her face thoughtful, eyes distant. Across from me, a young man stared at his phone, but his foot tapped softly to some music only he could hear. In that crowded space, surrounded by movement and noise, I felt a surprising calm, the same calm that had filled my kitchen before dawn. I realized then that stillness is not only a place, it is a way of being. You can carry it with you, even into chaos. And language, again, became a quiet companion. In my mind, I silently formed a simple sentence: I am standing here, breathing. Repeat that slowly with me: I am standing here, breathing. Say it again, gently. Let the words ground you, wherever you are. Later that week, I met an old friend for a walk along a river. The water moved steadily, reflecting the pale sky, carrying leaves and small ripples toward some unseen destination. We walked in comfortable silence for a while, and I felt no need to fill the space with conversation. When we did speak, our words felt softer, more considered. At one point, my friend said, "You seem different." I smiled, not quite sure how to explain. "How do you describe something that is more about feeling than thought?" I told him, simply. "I've been waking up earlier." He laughed lightly, but I knew there was more behind that statement. We stopped to watch a heron standing motionless near the bank, its reflection trembling slightly in the water. In that moment, I felt again that quiet awareness from the sense that the world is vast, yet intimate, complex, yet simple when we slow down enough to see it. I thought about how often we rush past beauty because we are focused on what comes next. In English, we say, "I was too busy to notice." But what if we changed that? Try saying this slowly: I chose to notice. Repeat it: I chose to notice. Feel how that shifts responsibility gently back to you. As evening approached that day, I returned home and sat by the window, watching the light fade. The room slowly filled with shadows, and I let myself sit in that transition, not reaching for a lamp, not turning on my phone, just observing. I realized that this, too, was a kind of language, the language of light and darkness, of presence and patience. I began to think about how learning English can mirror this process. At first, Everything feels dark, unfamiliar, difficult to see. Then slowly, as you listen, practice, and stay with it, shapes begin to appear. You recognize words, patterns, feelings, and eventually, the language becomes less like a foreign code and more like a landscape you can walk through with awareness. I remember a beginner student who once told me, "I feel lost in English." I told her that feeling lost is not a failure, it is part of the journey. At 4 a.m. I felt a kind of pleasant lostness, not afraid, not confused, just open to whatever appeared. Repeat after me, softly, "It's okay to feel lost." Again, "It's okay to feel lost." Let that be a gentle reminder that confusion can coexist with growth. In the months that followed, I noticed how often I returned to that early morning in my thoughts. Before difficult conversations, I would remember the quiet. Before speaking in front of a group, I would recall the slow warmth of my tea. Even before sleep, I would imagine that pale blue sky, easing my mind into rest. I began to see that the important realization was not something I could summarize neatly. It wasn't a lesson like wake up earlier or meditate more. It was more like a quiet understanding that life is richest when we meet it slowly, with attention, with kindness, with language that breathes. Sometimes I feel that we are all moving so quickly through our days that we forget how to simply be. We rush to learn, to achieve, to speak perfectly, to sound fluent, to appear confident. But at 4 a.m., none of that mattered. There was only being, only noticing, only gentle presence. Maybe you felt that rush too, the pressure to improve, to change, to become better. And yet, there is something powerful in simply accepting where you are. In English, we might say, "I am where I am." Try saying it slowly with me. I am where I am. Again, I am where I am. Let that be a place of peace, not resignation. As I speak to you now, I imagine you somewhere in your own world, perhaps in a room, on a street, on a bus, or lying in bed. You are breathing, listening, existing. That alone is meaningful. And if you are learning English, you are also taking a brave step not just toward a language, but toward deeper understanding of yourself and others. I hope that, in some small way, this story of waking at 4 a.m. invites you to slow down with your own words, your own thoughts, your own learning. You don't need to force clarity. You only need to create space for it. Take one more slow breath with me. And quietly, in English or your own language, say, "I am allowed to be here." Repeat it, "I am allowed to be here." Let that settle softly inside you, like the first light of dawn touching the sky. Because when we allow ourselves to be here, truly here, something important quietly reveals itself. Not with noise, but with gentle presence. And as that thought rests, "I am allowed to be here," I feel how it gently circles back to that very first moment, lying in bed at 4 eyes open in the dark, body still, mind quiet. In a way, everything we have walked through together, the kitchen, the train, the cafe, the grocery store, the bus, the river, the fading light has been leading back to that simple, unhurried presence. I think about how often we chase big realizations, waiting for something dramatic to shift our lives. We imagine that an important moment must come with thunder, clarity, or sudden transformation. But that morning taught me something different. The realization arrived softly, almost silently, like dawn itself. It didn't shout, it simply revealed. Even now, when I close my eyes, I can feel the cool floor beneath my feet, the warmth of the mug in my hands, the slow breathing of the house around me. I can feel how my body moved with care, how my thoughts drifted without urgency, how time felt wide instead of narrow. And I understand that this way of being is not tied to a specific hour. It is something I can return to whenever I choose. Sometimes I feel that learning English follows a similar path. You don't suddenly wake up fluent one day. Instead, you have many small dawns moments when a word becomes clearer. A sentence feels more natural. A feeling finds its voice. Little by little, the darkness lifts. Little by little, you begin to see. Maybe you've had your own version of that, a moment when something in the language quietly clicked, not because you forced it, but because you stayed with it. Maybe a phrase you repeated slowly finally felt like your own. Maybe a story you heard touched you in a way you didn't expect. Those are your early mornings in English. Try saying this softly with me one last time, as if you were speaking into that quiet before sunrise. I am learning. Slowly. Again, I am learning. Slowly. Let those words be kind, not critical. Let them remind you that your pace is enough. As the sky brightened that morning, I stood at the window and watched the first rays of sunlight touch the rooftops across the street. Birds began to sing more clearly. A distant car passed. The world was waking up, and I felt both small and deeply connected to it. I realized then that the important thing I had understood was not something to hold tightly, but something to carry gently. That awareness, slowness, and presence can change how we experience everything: our mornings, our conversations, our learning, our lives. Even when the day became busy, even when I felt tired, even when I spoke too quickly or worried too much, I knew I could return. I could breathe. I could slow down. I could notice again. That possibility was always there, like a quiet door I could open. And I hope you can carry that with you too, not as pressure, not as another rule, but as an invitation. You don't have to wake at 4, ma'am. You don't have to be perfectly calm. You only have to be willing, now and then, to pause, to listen, to feel, to be. As you continue with your own journey in English, in life, in whatever paths you are walking, remember that learning is not only about reaching somewhere, it is about how you travel. It is about breathing between steps, listening between words, noticing between moments. Take one final slow breath with me, and quietly, in your mind or out loud, say, I am here and I am learning. Repeat it gently. I am here and I am learning. Let that be your quiet dawn wherever you are. Because in that simple awareness, being here, learning slowly, trusting yourself, something truly important continues to unfold, softly, steadily, like the morning light. This is English with Thomas. I'm Thomas. Keep speaking, keep growing, and keep trusting yourself.